You're despicable.
Welcome to the Golden Belt Buckle Podcast. This is the slowest growing channel in all of YouTube history. So if you could do me a favor, please like and subscribe before we go any further. Doesn't cost you anything, just takes 2 seconds, just a little tap, and away we go. So last video, we talked about the Driver Inc. model. And if you haven't watched that, I encourage you to watch it. I gave a breakdown of Driver Inc., what it is. And in this video, we're going to go a little bit deeper because the Driver Inc. model, as far as I can tell, just scratches the surface. So from what I've been reading, it looks to me like new Canadians, they come over here and they're getting scammed and borderline put into indentured servitude. Not legally, but practically. So I'm going to go over how this immigration scam works, how it relates to the trucking industry, and how it relates to Driver Inc. And so here's how this scam works. Trucking companies here, if they want to bring in East Indian immigrants to drive their trucks for them. So they have to apply for labor market assessment or impact assessment, LMIA. So they apply for this, and what this does is it shows that they can't fill the job with a local Canadian. So they need to go abroad to get drivers to come in and do work that Canadians don't want to do. So they have a pipeline of consultants that are over in India, and these consultants are like recruiters. They will promise the world to young East Indian men and women to get them to sign on, come over to Canada, and the company, once they're here, before they arrive, they'll get them a work permit, or it'll be a work permit that's tied to that company. So they're in India, they get recruited by an immigration consultant, and they get over here and they come over on a work permit, which is tied to that company. So they come in off the boat, they get picked up from the airport, they get housed, they get put into a trucking school, which is oftentimes owned or closely associated with that trucking company. That school has authority to test the drivers. So the driver doesn't have to go to a drive test to earn their driver's license. They get their license through this school. The training is a bit shady, but once they get through all this is where the Driver Inc. model comes in. The trucking company that they get on with runs them under the Driver Inc. model. So they will not actually work for this company. They will work as an independent contractor, which is incorporated in their own business. So we covered all this in the last video. The driver is responsible to pay their own taxes, their own corporate taxes, their own employee taxes. And they're not actually an employee of the company, even though they drive the company equipment. They're dispatched by that company. Their company owns those routes. It's forced dispatch. And they can only work for that company. So that's how it works right there, right? So you have they come from India, the consultant, they go to a driving school, work permit to this company, and then they're brought on the Driver Inc. model. So how is this shady? That's the next question. Well, because all of this costs money. And I don't even want to believe this, but the Labor Market Impact Assessment, LMIA document, from what I read, it only costs about $1,000 to process, but the companies, they charge, it's like they negotiate a price with the immigrant and they charge them thousands for this piece of documentation. Even though it only costs them $1,000, they upsell it. I want to believe this is wrong, but I've heard cases of $20,000 to $30,000. I can't even process that. I don't want to believe that. That's what I'm reading. So whether they charge it to them directly or charge it as a consulting fee, a labor immigration or a consultant, an immigration consultant fee. I'm not sure, but the driver comes over here, they're indebted sometimes tens of thousands of dollars already. And on top of that, they're also charged for the housing. They got to pay for the school, and they have to pay for rides to and from the school, sometimes food because they have nothing when they come here. And they get through these schools and they can't speak a word of English. They can barely drive. They're rushed through the school under shady circumstances. And then being in all this debt and having their work visa tied to this employer and being under the Driver Inc. model, the employer virtually owns them, because with the Driver Inc. model, it's another element of control for the employer over this employee who's not really an employee, because they can just fire them for any reason. They're their own corporation. When a company doesn't want to deal with one corporation, doesn't want to deal with another corporation, unless they got a contract, they can just quit dealing with them. So this employee or contractor, they can just be fired for any reason. So picture yourself in this situation. You come over here, you go through this pipeline, you're indebted to this employer. You can only work for this employer because your work visa, your work permit is tied to that employer. And on top of that, the employer can fire you for any reason. So because you're in this situation, they can hold your immigration status over your head. You will work for us. You will pay us back. You will stay here till we are paid back, or you're going back to India. That's how this works, right? So you'll read stories, like I'm going to put a bunch of links in this video. These drivers, they're victims, and they go down the road as teams. And when one guy is out of hours, if maybe the other guy's not ready to go yet, you'll read stories of the employer forcing them to drive on their co-driver's logbook, right? They'll have them driving trucks that are unsafe. They'll have them driving on no sleep when they're sick. They don't have a choice, because if they stop that truck and argue with their employer can just get them sent back to India. Ultimately, they're hoping to get permanent residency here. That's what their goal is. So they have to put up with it for however many years their employer wants to run them to death. So that's how the scam works. You see these East Indians, or New Canadians, running down they're not really Canadians yet if they haven't got their citizenship, but you see these folks running down the highway. They're not only putting people in danger by going through these shady schools that just push them through this pipeline as quick as they can, but they're also victims. But let's go a little further with this. What happens when these companies go out of business? Because once your CVOR gets bad enough, you'll be put out of business, right? You'll get put out of business, and this is what happens. So the way they get around this, they start up a Chameleon company, and it happens enough that there's actually a name for it. It's called a Chameleon company. The owner of that trucking company will just incorporate under the name of their sister, their mother, their father, their brother, and they'll start another trucking company. Now, the government is trying to crack down on this. They have red flags from what I'm reading. If they see that you're starting a Chameleon company, they'll try to put you out of business. So you have this cat and mouse game going on, but that's the scam. A while back, I got into it with one of these guys at one of my customers. Now, I'm very customer oriented. I care deeply about our customers because that's what's putting food on my table, right? And my truck broke down and I blocked in one of these guys. They couldn't get around me. And he went off on me. He started cussing and swearing at me, and then I went off on him because I didn't like how he was talking to me. And next thing, we're yelling back and forth at each other. We're being polite to the customer. We're telling each other where to go. And I thought it was going to come to blows. That's the closest I've been to getting into a fist fight out here in a really long time. But knowing what I know now, this fella was probably operating under that model, and he was probably under a lot of stress. He probably had his employer coming down on him to get those miles on that truck. And, you know, I was in his way, and he was stressing out. He was panicking over what he was going to do. What's he going to tell his employer? So that's the scam. It almost reminds me of, well, like I said earlier, it reminds me of indentured servitude. If you've ever read the book White Cargo, talks about how the British government rounded up all the vagrants and war criminals, prisoners of war, basically, and just young, naive people, and they promised them the world if they would just go to the new world, and they would call it whisking them away or spirited away. They get spirited away, not knowing what they were getting themselves into, and then coming over here and finding out they were the property of a planter, and they could be sold to whoever they wanted to until their servitude was up, right? Well, this is almost similar to that. It's not legal, but it kind of looks similar. That the young East Indian over in India thinks they're getting a great deal. They're going to be able to immigrate over to Canada. They're going to get a job driving a truck because they have no other skills. So it sounds attractive to get a job driving a truck, and then they're spirited away from India with all these promises. They get over here and they're virtually enslaved by their employer. So they can get out of it, but it's from what I read, it's a difficult process getting your work visa or your work permit moved from one employer to another. So anyway, that's the scam. That's all I got for you today. Until next time, remember, like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. I enjoy nerding out. I enjoy bringing it to you just because I like nerding out on stuff. I like finding answers. So anyway, have a good day. Keep the rubber side down. Take it easy.